Mr. Driehaus, Dean Makudis, faculty and students of the University of Notre Dame, former laureates, family, and friends. This weekend, with its exceptional outpouring of generosity, is truly moving for me. Though much has already been said, I'm compelled to take a little more of your time to offer some further words and to thank you for coming to the award ceremony. Your presence means an enormous amount to me personally. Through the generosity of your time at this public celebration, you not only flatter me, but also valorize the Driehaus Prize and all it stands for as the standard bearer for the enduring values of architecture as a continuously evolving discourse rooted in tradition. Architecture is not a solitary pursuit, and the work for which I am being recognized would have been very much less than it is were it not for the sympathetic collaboration and support of so many others. I would like to express my thanks to my professional partners and to the very many architects, designers, engineers, scholars, and other professionals who have collaborated with me in the work that is being honored today, and who have taught me so very much about the art of architecture and its possibilities. And let me not overlook the essential ingredient, the clients, without whose support, in many cases over multiple projects, this prize would not have been mine today. Clients, we love them when we have them. We don't love them when we don't have them. They are the necessary ingredient. I would also like to express my appreciation for the work of my colleagues on the faculties of two great universities I've been privileged to be part of. First, Columbia, and now Yale. As well as I am in awe of the many students over the years, some of whom are here in this room today, who have survived my wilder experiments in the classroom and studio to go on to great accomplishments, individual accomplishments in architecture, the profession, and art we all love. And lastly, I would like to thank the prize jury who chose me from among very many others who surely are also worthy of this honor. I'm deeply touched by this award, unquestionably the greatest honor available to those who endeavor to pursue a practice of architecture based on age-old principles, but also open to new possibilities. And I am hugely flattered to be in the distinguished company of the previous laureates, surely a most august group, but especially so as it includes longtime friends and sometimes collaborators, Jack Robertson, Alan Greenberg, Leon Krier, Dimitri Porphyrios, Andres Duani, and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg, as well as last year's distinguished laureate, Rafael Manzano Martos. I also want to thank Richard Driehaus for founding an architectural prize unlike any other, one that celebrates design achievement measured by a consistent, time-honored set of principles, unlike the winners of other architectural prizes, who are celebrated for their unique accomplishments. The Driehaus Prize winners are honored for accomplishments realized in relationship to shared beliefs. This is a celebration of design research into what is possible and what is desirable, into what an architect can discover about the self, the world, and the art of architecture. The process of design confronts architects with a reality which will be true for them always, that the architecture project is never really finished. The better one gets at architecture, the more one wants to get better still. Architecture is a profession, an art, but most of all, an obsession. The long trajectory of history has given form to buildings and places that permit men and women to coexist with dignity, to communicate, to share, and yet to retain a measure of their individuality. Architecture is fundamentally a humanistic discipline. As such, it must be open to the cross currents of ideas, welcoming that which is new and challenging while measuring the conflicting claims of the present against standards that have prevailed in the past. In a world of competing isms, of combative certainties, architects do not provide answers so much as ask questions. I welcome the potential reach of today's global practice, though it is much abused by architects and clients alike, who take it as an opportunity to throw aesthetic caution to the winds of shameless self-promotion. Global practice at its most responsible has the capacity to realize architecture that is neither about a personal signature style nor about abstract, universal, and consequently impersonal modes of expression. Global practice challenges us to bring the advantages of modernity's material benefits to those who need and want them, while not imposing a singular conception about what architecture is or should be. The more we encounter the global, the more we should value the local. I am as interested in architects as much as about the next architect, I suppose. But I am also interested in the humble buildings that shape the circumstances of daily life. Not every building should knock one's eyes out. There is the value in the second glance. For me, a sunlit corner in a courtyard or a glimpse of nature in a dense urban setting have within them the ineffable magic of placemaking that helps lift lives to higher levels of awareness while dignifying the daily routine. There are many ways of making architecture, with many more no doubt to come. The human capacity for invention is limitless. But at the core, there are certain standards that always define quality. As architects, we need to be ever suspicious of trends masquerading as ideas. Part of this prize celebrates contributions to architecture through writing. Sometimes, as I consider what I've written over the years, I wish I'd kept my thoughts to myself. As a young architect, as Jack pointed out, I wrote to make space for myself and my colleagues, generational colleagues, to reach out to members of my own generation and to create intellectual noise that would get attention of the older architects, whom I profoundly believed were more dangerous because they weren't asleep. My early writings were a plea for architecture to be considered as culture, not merely as an enabling discipline. This, I still believe, is essential to our self-conception as professionals. As I grew older, I turned more and more to writing about architecture's history, which has been and remains a continual source of pleasure and inspiration. While I enjoy losing myself in a previous period of time, I pick my periods and subjects strategically. New York City, for example, because its success as a city flies in the face of virtually every modernist idea about architecture and urbanism that was drilled into me as a student, most of which I have since come to disdain. Early on, I chronicled the career of the Philadelphia architect George Howe, a traditionalist architect who embraced modernism but came to see its limitations. Howe's example has grounded me these many years. Currently, I am deep into the history of the Anglo-American garden suburb because it is the only viable environmental response to the challenges of family life to have come forth in modern times. Yet it has almost completely been ignored, if not disdained, by the intelligentsia. These are difficult but interesting times for the profession, as the age-old authority of built form is challenged by the immense imagistic power of electronic media, which some architects find so compelling that they are prepared to overthrow architecture as we know it. Though new times need new solutions, architecture has an obligation to see beyond the moment. It will be too bad if we could succumb to the siren song of electronics only to realize that we have traded a physical architecture of solid and void for an illusionistic world of smoke, mirrors, mist, and fog. Architecture must remain true to its own nature and purpose. The great challenge to the architect is not to have a visionary idea, but to respond to circumstance with something tangible, useful, beautiful even, a word not used too often, something that connects as it challenges. Connects to what and whom, one may ask? Well, certainly to architecture's own traditions, but also to a wide range of people, so that a building, a place, becomes a part of common experience. Architecture finds its highest expression when it connects with culture as a whole. I began to learn how to be an architect at Yale in the early 1960s, when, largely because Eero Saarinen had the confidence of Yale's president A. Whitney Griswold, the university embarked on a major campaign of construction in which some of the most interesting younger architects of the day were encouraged to realize provocative work. It was a privilege to be able to see exciting new buildings all around being constructed on the campus. Yet dazzlingly inventive though these new buildings were in and of themselves, with only a few exceptions, they made little collective sense. Two great teachers at Yale, the architect Paul Rudolph, head of the program in architecture, and the art historian Vincent Scully, as they each struggled to cast aside the rigid ideological strictures of modernism, helped open my eyes to a more inclusive view of modern architecture as a whole, one that was grounded in the past and not apart from it, as so many then believed. At the deepest level, Rudolph and Scully shared a profound belief that architecture succeeds as it expresses the interrelationship of man, building, and place. Two others joined Scully and Rudolph as significant influences on me. Robert Venturi helped me see the buildings of the past in fresh ways, while opening up to the various ways a modern architect could appropriate them for his or her own purposes in the present. But perhaps most of all, Philip Johnson deeply impressed me with his exhortation, "You cannot not know history." As a student, I would gaze out the windows of our top-floor studio in Louis Kahn's loft-like art gallery building, through which I would contemplate Yale's Gothic skyline of the 1920s and 30s. You heard some of this on the screen. Widely admired as the physical embodiment of the university by most, except architects, who saw its expressive use of historical precedent as constituent foolishness. I began to wonder about the events that had caused architectural opinion to change so dramatically in the 20 or so years between the time when the last of those Gothic Yale buildings had been built and the time when I began my studies in architecture. In short, I began to develop doubts about the obsessive presentness of modernism. I am a modern architect, but I am not a modernist. In fact, I am deeply suspicious of isms of any kind, and I hope the day will soon come when tradition can be reconciled with modernity, leading to a cessation of the 20th century civil war between the two, replacing it with a more nuanced approach that puts human values over ideology and dogma. In hoping for this foolish waste of artistic energy to play to a conclusion, I am encouraged by the words of the great Finnish architect Alvar Aalto, who was frequently asked, "Are you traditional or modern?" To which Aalto would always and wisely reply, "There are only two things in art, humanity and not." Today, more than ever, architects must be traditional and modern. The global reach that increasingly characterizes contemporary practice brings with it one certainty: the need for each of us to recognize that there can be no overweening, singular, universal, applicable style with which to design our buildings and cities. The modern world is, if nothing else, heterogeneous, forcing us to think freely, to keep an open mind, to relish its variety. But an open mind is not to be confused with an unprincipled mind. So I assert that we need the classical, which is not a style, as Dimitri Porphyrios put so beautifully 20 years ago in that very important essay, or merely a repertoire of great buildings, but is a theoretical basis for best practice, a grammar, a syntax, a respect for earth-centered construction. In short, a discipline without parallel or peer. For me, the classical tradition is the gateway to the house of architecture. To embrace the classical tradition is to enter into the etymology of architectural form, to release architecture from circumstantial action into realms of meaning rooted to the enduring natural order of the world. The classical tradition is the root, the measure, the datum, which gives order not only to the lingua franca, but be they the traditional and craft vernaculars of the pre-industrial past, but also to the mechanical vernaculars of mass production, which are unavoidable in the present. In my work as an architect, historian, and educator, I believe I've learned that one can adhere to classical principles and still be very much a modern architect. This may seem contradictory to some, including some in this room, who may see the world of classicism as inherently compatible to that of modernity. But I stand with the early 20th century French poet Alain Chartier, who proclaimed, "Nothing is more dangerous than an idea when you have only one." I believe one can be both classical and modern. And I believe, as have many of the notable moderns before me, including Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, and Louis I. Kahn, that the classical tradition provides true compass points by which architects may guide their individual journeys. As I near the close of these remarks, I'd like to say a few words about tradition. There is a profound difference between tradition and custom. Custom is habit. It is fixed. Custom is business as usual, often unthinking, even unconscious. Custom is what bureaucrats do, except for Bob Peck in Washington. Tradition is deliberate and considered. To value a tradition and to maintain it over time requires a conscious effort and a sense of self. Traditions are very precious. They are talismans, symbols, beliefs. Tradition provides a refuge from the rootlessness of everyday life. But tradition is not fixed. Tradition evolves just as culture evolves. Traditions can be imitated but not initiated. One architect cannot a tradition make. Architects should stop worrying about self-expression and zeitgeist, which lead to an obsession with saying things differently as opposed to saying them clearly or meaningfully. Obviously, each architect dreams of making a contribution, but such contributions are best made when within a context. In embracing tradition, there is no need to throw out invention. In fact, I believe that without tradition, there can be no invention. In 1923, Le Corbusier offered the challenge, architecture or revolution. For our moment, I would propose something different and more conciliatory, tradition and modernity. Architecture is a commitment to both the discovery of new things and the recovery of valuable things once known and now forgotten. Architecture is invention and affirmation, search and research. It is a vital natural force, an important human activity, a constellation of possibilities. It is the best way humankind has yet devised to shape the world. The hardest thing to do, it seems to me, is to base your work on what is known, but then to at once make work that is as good as the model on which it is based, and is at the same time fresh and with its own identity. That is the impossible dream for this modern traditional architect. Impossible, yes, but a dream still worth dreaming. I thank you for the great honor of the Driehaus Prize and for your commitment to the great and useful art of architecture.